You may remember in one of my earlier YouTube videos that I painted an old doorway which found its way into one of my art books, Desperate Doorways. But I've also been doing a series of shoes and making up little short stories about the owners of the shoes or some of the experiences that they've had. And that will go into a book probably called Shameless Shoes. So this is going to be a quick demonstration on how I paint those shoes. I'll show you one or two examples that I've done so far. Anything from a pair of old boots, red high heels, children's shoes, ballet shoes, and I've put a story to each of these. And so some of those will feature in the book which will come out on Amazon, as I say, probably called Shameless Shoes. I do them pen and wash, and it's that quick technique I'm going to show in this video. And I'm going to base it on this pair of sort of old English brogues. The original photograph actually shows it the other way around. Obviously tanned leather. The thing I want you to really note are the highlights, the sort of white areas where the light is bouncing off the shoe directly into the viewer's eyes. And the way that I paint is that I identify where my lightest lights are going to be and also where my darkest darks. And if I put the two together, light against dark, you get this lovely feeling of contrast, a lot of tonal shaping and so forth, which I think enhances the picture, the painting. And I also combine that with a lot of wet into wet work, letting the colours mix on the paper, and also I keep the colours down to a number of different colours down to a small short selection. And when I'm using a colour, if I want to make it darker, then I try if possible not to add another colour to it. I try to keep the colours fresh by just simply using either more or less water in the pigments that I use. The colours I'm going to use for this are simply going to be yellow ochre to start off with burnt sienna and some burnt umber, but I shall also be introducing a couple of Daniel Smith colours, Quinacridone Gold and Quinacridone Sienna, which I've more or less fallen in love with. And I'm working in an A5 Hahnemull toned sketchbook. Now, as you can see, I've already drawn the brogues out and used ink. You can just draw them in pencil and just paint. I'm doing pen and wash. It's entirely up to you. Anyway, let's get started. And I'm going to start off with my lightest tones. So I'm going to note where the highlights are. Start off with some yellow ochre, just to get that going, quite wet. And there's a highlight just around about here, so I'm going to leave that without any colour on it. There's a highlight around here too. There's fairly light around there. So this is just a base coating. I'm just working on one shoe here at the moment. And then I'm going to use the same colour again, yellow ochre, but with less water in it this time, making it slightly darker. Because I'm working wet into wet, then the the paint's going on without any real hard edges. Being pretty sketchy. I'm going to introduce a little bit of this Quinacridone Gold now. As you can see, I'm not being particularly careful. All I'm doing is maintaining areas where I want there to be highlights. And having got some of the tone on, some of the colour on in a moment, I shall start to just move it around by using a hungry brush with some water in it, just a damp brush, just to soften some of those areas there. Okay. Just going in with slightly stickier pigment, but maintaining those highlights. I'm going to just I'm going to use Quinacridone Gold here. Sorry, sienna. You could use burnt sienna. And working wet into wet, you'll see that we're getting all sorts of lovely texture coming in. Moving it around a little bit just to blend it. Again, using a hungry brush just to make sure that there are no dry edges. So now we're going to introduce a little bit of burnt umber. Just blend that slightly. At the moment it looks just a little bit of a mess, doesn't matter. It'll all come right. using a little bit more of the Quinacridone Gold and a little bit of the burnt sienna there as well. It's just quite important on leather like this, just to make sure that they're quite soft. Right, just going to dry that off. So I've added a bit more burnt sienna, a bit burnt umber, just to get a bit more tonal contrast here and there. Softened up some of these light areas. You'll note that I haven't bothered with the laces at the moment. I'll either make those darker or take some of the tone off of them before I paint those. What will begin to make these shoes come alive is shadow. But I'm going to just do a little bit of work on the second shoe to start off with before I go into that. Now, the thing always when you try to define one shape against another is very often contrast, and this shoe here is quite dark where it is up against the other shoe. So I want to make the other shoe here, there will be some shadow, but I'm going to make it sort of a bit lighter so that there is this contrast between the two shoes. So starting off again with some yellow ochre, leaving the light areas virtually paint free at the moment. Just remove some of the colour there, some of the tone. Good. Just using some of this Quinacridone Gold, but you could use yellow ochre, a bit more yellow ochre, or raw sienna. So just building that up in the same way as I did the first shoe. This Winsor Newton burnt sienna, I think, is I've said it before in other films, is really just about the best burnt sienna I've ever come across. It's a beautiful colour. Again with a bit of burnt umber. Trying to keep the second shoe light, a bit light, beside the first shoe, just to give myself a bit of contrast. Okay. Right, try that off. Right, so I'm just going to mix up, this is one of the colours I do mix up, a shadow colour, and for that I'm going to use a violet, a brown and a blue. So you can make that out of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson and a burnt umber if you like, and it's just to add a little bit of shading. See, I'm putting shadows there under the leather work. And where they punch these little holes in the brogues, just a little bit of shadow there too. Now I'm going to introduce a bit of white highlighter here and there as well, on where the light's catching some of these holes. I'll do that with a white Posca pen later on. For the interiors of the shoes, I'm going to make them lighter. So just starting off with a little bit of yellow ochre. Followed by a little bit of burnt sienna. As you can see, I very often work directly from the tube rather than from the palette. Just get these going in the right direction. Working wet into wet. Again, we don't want any hard edges, so just a bit of water there. And then where the heel grinds itself into the back of the shoe, to make that darker. I'll dry those off before I add shadow colour to them. So now I'm going to make up a nice warm shadow inside there, so plenty of burnt umber. Bit of violet, bit of cobalt blue. Soften that as it comes out into the shoe. Again, just soften the edge there. A nice sticky dark burnt umber right into the corner there. Okay. Now for the soles of the shoes, I think we have a very, very dark piece just where the upper leather meets the sole. So quite a sticky burnt umber, touch of blue to it. Okay. Just dry that off now. So now we can do the sides of the soles of the shoe. That's a slightly lighter colour, so I'm going to start off with a bit of yellow ochre. Add a little touch of burnt sienna. There's a bit of a highlight just coming in there, so at that point there, so just leave that for the moment. And whilst that's still wet, drop in with burnt umber, leaving some areas nice and light. Okay. And for the laces, I'm going to use burnt umber, which when it's dry I shall add a little bit of white gouache to, just to give it some highlights. And these, there will be a shadow underneath the shoes anyway, which I'll do in a minute. But these laces will leave a bit of a shadow on the shoe itself. Okay. So again, just dry that off. So what I'm doing now is just emphasizing some of these highlights with a little bit of fairly dry white gouache. Don't want to overdo it. I also sometimes use a Posca white pen too, which sometimes slightly easier to use. Just gives that little bit of freshness and movement. Okay, but don't overdo that. And finally, I'm going to put in some shadows under the shoes. Nothing too much, just a little shadow area. And I always put the basic shape in with pencil to start off with. If I don't do that, then I find that my shadows become too big. Shadow colour, again, as I say, it's the one thing that I do mix up. So burnt umber, a violet, a touch of blue, cobalt blue perhaps, and you want to get it on in one quick go. So I'll start off over here. And it just grounds the object you're painting. A shadow around that lace that's just there. Now there are two shadows, as I've mentioned before. There's the cast shadow, and there's also what I call the proximity shadow, which is the shadow right up beside the object, which is always a little bit darker. So I'll just put that in now. And that really grounds the object, so just right up beside it there. You don't want a hard line, so if it does start to go hard, just use a little bit of water to soften it. Okay. Almost there. I'm just going to dry that off. So there's the shoot is basically finished. Just to liven things up as usual for me, I'm going to add a bit of splatter. You don't have to do this. I quite enjoy it. It tends to give a bit of dynamism to the painting. I don't do it all the time, but anyway, I'm just going to add a little bit here and there. Those are quite large splatters. This is white gouache. If it's a little bit too much, you can always just dab a little bit of it off. Fine. Follow that with a bit of red, pyrrole red. Red takes the eye in. Bit of a lesson from Turner there. And I often use a little bit of cobalt teal blue as well. But not too much. That'll do there, I think. Again, just try that off. So there we go. This is just one method of painting shoes. Pen and wash. As I say, some people prefer not to use pen, and that's perfectly okay. I've used a gouache, the white gouache, to help emphasize some of the highlights. A lot of people frown on that. That's perfectly alright. You've just got to choose whatever method's appropriate. I don't like pictures which are all pristine and lovely and sharp. I just feel that there's no dynamism to them, and that's why I use some of the splatter and so forth. Anyway, so I always start with very light colours and light tones to start off with, building up, getting darker and darker, trying to retain some of the highlighted areas, and using tone to give me my feeling of 3 dimensions. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and there are so many shoes out there that the choice of style and so forth is very, very wide. So anyway, if you do start painting shoes, enjoy yourself. Thank you for watching.